So today I'm joined by Nitesh, CEO and founder of DFlow. I'm really excited for this chat. To be honest, it's been a wild ride on Solana. We've seen trading volumes go from as low as 50 million a day last cycle, all the way to the depths of the bear. People that were there remember those days. All the way up to last year and volumes peaking in the January 25 timeframe, billions of dollars a day. The day Trump launched, Solana did over 20% of NASDAQ's volumes. So it's been a wild ride. I guess my first question for you, Nitesh, is could you give a little bit of background on yourself? And from someone who's been building in Solana DeFi since the jump, how's this roller coaster been? And what are some of the I guess landmarks that you've seen along the way?
Yeah, great to be here, first of all. So I started building DFlow in 2021, and prior to that, I was a researcher at a high-frequency trading firm. Got into Solana by kind of like playing around with Serum in late 2020, and then the summer of 2021 started building DFlow, which was effectively based on this idea that when users trade on Solana, they're getting pretty terrible execution relative to the sort of execution that I was like very familiar with, working on trading strategies and high frequency trading. So massive spreads, lots of slippage, intentions broadcasted as publicly as possible, things like that. So DFlow is basically based on this idea that we want to make trading on chain for users just a very, very great experience, like super tight spreads, great prices, immediate execution. And the flip side of that is making the market making experience really good. So the easier the market makers have it to provide really tight liquidity, the tighter the spreads get for users actually crossing it. So we build a number of things that sort of like enable that to happen for the market makers. One of them is a Solana DEX aggregator. This is the primary thing that DFlow builds. We aggregate liquidity from various on-chain sources and then implement protocols that make it easier for market makers to provide liquidity on-chain. That's what we do today.
Awesome. I think one of the most perhaps surprising things for people who've been around DeFi for a couple of years is there's a strong narrative that order books would take over and we would never look back. But to date, still most of the price discovery is happening on AMMs. So I guess more broadly speaking, how do you view the role of like DEXs? Are they exchanges? Like obviously it's in the name, but how do you view the role of AMMs today?
Yeah, so I'm not super certain why order books have not really taken off in the way that they have in more centralized or off-chain contexts. Order books on Solana have this property of like sort of being a hot state that many makers are trying to access, and maybe that is one reason. But the market structure that we have seen play out in Solana has generally been that AMMs are not actually exchanges; they're market makers. So the term DEX is kind of like a misnomer on Solana, at least. The AMMs are market makers. And what we've found is that the order books, protocols like Phoenix or OpenBook, those are not like sort of like the true matching engines. The true matching engines have become things like aggregators, and the DEX aggregators sort of facilitate price discovery and connect the buyers and sellers, and then execute via the makers on chain via the form of AMMs.
Got it. So, I mean, what I'm seeing is an ecosystem with immense potential. There's, millions of tokens that have been created. They're doing massive trading volume, but the systems is still quite imperfect. It feels like there's a lot of optimizations to be made. So, I mean, like, just taking a step back and looking at the whole chessboard, what are some of the things that are, wrong or I guess can be really improved upon within this whole like price discovery, order flow, MEV matrix? And I guess like what are some of the solutions that you guys are bringing to market?
Yeah, so the the main problem with the market structure that exists, the decentralized market structure that exists on Solana, is that it is sort of unfairly biased towards favoring takers. So specifically, when a market maker is making markets, they sort of have like this constant exposure that is just always present, in that they are posting their quotes on chain. This is resting liquidity and it is free for anyone to come and trade with. So when a sophisticated taker kind of sees that, they sort of like see an opportunity to what we call like pick off the maker. And it is very difficult right now because of the way Solana's like network structure works for a maker to um, actually move their quotes out of the way and sort of like cancel their liquidity. And this is sort of like the unfair bias that exists towards takers against makers. This bias has made it very difficult to quote very tightly on chain. And so what you notice is that spreads are wide for users, even on markets that are generally tight off chain. Now, this is changing more and more as some of these like proprietary AMMs start popping up. But the solutions that sort of we pioneer in this space are um, conditional liquidity primarily. So conditional liquidity is a mechanism that allows makers to have some amount of information about who the takers are, and entirely on chain, they can adjust their quoting logic um, in sort of like the Turing complete language that they are able to write their contracts in. And this provides sort of like a lot of strong guarantees about quoting tightly to certain types of order flow and quoting wider to other types of order flow.
Got it. So at the point when you can sort of segment liquidity, you can price it out differently, right? And then depending on the nature of that flow, different players can basically position accordingly, right? So if it's like, say, more toxic flow, they quote wider spreads. And if they have a higher line of sight to something being pristine, high signal order flow, then they can quote tighter spreads.
Yep, that's a correct summary. So like this is a mechanism that's just known as order flow segmentation. In traditional finance and like equities markets, this is taken a step further and turns into something that looks like payment for order flow. But the sort of like the core mechanism of segmenting order flow based on its toxicity um, is a sound market mechanism that makes markets tighter.
Makes sense. So I guess in the mission to tighten spreads on Solana and conditional liquidity and order flow segmentation being a key sort of tool in doing that, what are some of the like second order effects or knock on effects of like tighter spreads, I guess, in the Solana ecosystem?
Yeah, so I like to think of sort of market making and tight spreads as a early signal of like DeFi growth. On Ethereum with 12-second block times and things like that, like spreads are very wide on chain, and this is by necessity. And like the market structure that's evolved on Ethereum has sort of like leans towards monopolistic block builders and things of this nature. Um, the second order effects of conditional liquidity and very tight spreads are effectively that if a spread is very tight, you sort of over time as people trade, they're leaking less value to actually having to cross a spread. So if users are actually have this like effect of cheaper trading and tighter spreads when they trade, they save more money every time they trade, or rather they leave less money on the table. Um, and over time, across sort of like the full set of users on Solana, this has a strong statistical effect of um, allowing users to trade more. If users are trading more because the trading is cheaper, um, market makers, dexes, protocols, they all sort of like collect more protocol revenue that's then reinvested into the protocols, redistributed to the tokens, used to build better applications. This attracts more users. Um, and the cycle repeats. More users, cheaper trading, because more users means more flow, and more flow means market makers have sort of like a bigger opportunity, provided the flow is soft, which it is, coming from users. So it's a strong sort of like growth loop for Solana DeFi.
That's awesome. I guess sort of taking a step back, looking at Solana's end state, since the beginning, Tully has been super clear. He aims to, synchronize the world's information every 400 milliseconds or less. I think in that like quest for better price discovery on chain, how do you view like sort of payment for order flow evolving between, say, sophisticated actors versus retail traders? So like retail trader being, John Smith with, $1,000 in his Phantom wallet versus like, you know, uh, prop shops and trading outfits that are more sophisticated running algos. How do you view the sort of like market dynamic to unfold between those two different players?
Yeah, so the question is, I think, a little bit related to like payment for order flow and what the dynamics of that are. I think I'll start by saying that like payment for order flow is just like a bad name given to like a market mechanism that is ultimately sound. And payment for order flow, in my opinion, does not look like um, Phantom, which we are integrated in. Uh, selling off. I don't know anything about Phantom and how they are planning on doing this, by the way. But take your canonical wallet. I don't think payment for order flow looks like transactions being sold to searchers or block builders, and the searchers returning some amount of value. What I think this looks like effectively is you allow the market of liquidity providers to tighten as much as possible to the flow. So you lower the barriers of entry to competing for the flow to purely just providing the tightest bid or ask. And if you're able to do that, you've effectively made the market tighter. If the liquidity providers know that the flow is coming from a certain front end and have some guarantees that it's coming from a human as opposed to a bot, they can quote even tighter. And at the end of the day, these tighter quotes are passed on to the user in the form of price improvements. And then I think the payment for order flow part is literally just if the wallet wants to capture those price improvements for themselves, they just add a platform fee. And they can add dynamic platform fees, things of that nature. But it's a really simple mechanism. There's nothing sort of like nefarious happening on it if it were implemented correctly, which we aim to do. Yeah.
It's pretty incredible because I think people have this vision of or this concept of like PFOF from TradFi, but it's all opaque. It's all like negotiated. But here it's just a program. It's transparent, and I think what's beautiful about DFlow is that it's going to help the market get more efficient, tighten spreads, help people get more tokens for their trade every time they do a swap. But they're also going to share in the benefits of those improvements, right? They're not just going to a citadel of the world like with Robinhood. Here, it's like owned by the people, so to speak, and it's transparent, which I think is a beautiful thing. Maybe one of my last questions is around we've seen different types of tokens come out. We've seen, some meme coins that a week after being created are doing more volume than Tesla. Um, how do you view like the type of tokens that are coming out on Solana and that pipeline, which seems to never stop? How do you see that evolving over time?
Yeah. So I'll make a brief comment on what you said earlier. Like the goal of DeFi is indeed antithetical to DeFi to build something that is the Citadel Robinhood dynamic, but just in crypto this time. And the sort of like major blockers to that happening in equities markets, the reason this is like not a great mechanism is because it's very difficult to compete for that order flow. There are very high barriers to entry. You need to have teams of salespeople and legal and the right relationships. And in DeFi, it's none of that. It's all meritocratic. You submit your bid, and if it's a tight bid or offer, then you get the flow. Um, on the second question of like, okay, there are a bunch of tokens being created. How does this relate to like things like conditional liquidity and market makers that are quoting on chain? Um, Market makers do not have uh, inventory in sort of like all of these meme coins. So as the meme coins are created, they have a lot of volume, but don't generally have access to market makers. Yeah, running out of time, so I'll stop there. But generally the TLDR is that new tokens migrate their way up the risk curve, turn into majors, some die. But AMMs, sort of the vanilla ones that don't have maker liquidity or proprietary, play a really important role in providing liquidity for those meme coins.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Nitesh. Super excited about what you're building.
Awesome. Great to be here. Thanks.